Welcome, friends, to our Monday morning class 2 for the New Path book study and meditation. My name is Sanjan. I'm broadcasting from Ananda. Welcome, friends, to Ananda, Sacramento in California. And I'm thoroughly looking forward to these Monday mornings. So some of you have already meditated, some of you may yet to meditate, or it may be later in the day. But here we get to spend time with Swami Kriyananda and Paramhansa Yogananda and the Masters as we dive into this beautiful book, The New Path by Swami Kriyananda, about his life with Paramhansa Yogananda. So we're going to finish today, just so you know, we're going to start in a moment with a prayer. We're going to have a little song written by Swami Kriyananda, and then we'll meditate just for a moment or two. And then we'll go into listening to the rest of chapter 15, A Map Discovered. We didn't get very far last week, but we're going to be going at a slow pace anyway. And then we'll just dive into that chapter till the end. And we may go on a bit further as well. Let's see how time unfolds. But we're going to be looking at what Swami Kriyananda drew from the book, from Autobiography of a Yogi, as he starts to read it and completes it, how he started to make changes in his life and drastic changes, and how he felt that he wanted to follow the teachings of, well, Yogananda, and that he was to be his guru. He felt that very deeply. So we'll explore these things in this chapter. So let's begin with a prayer. So, and I wanted to just warmly welcome everybody from all over the place. Hello to those that have written to me this week, that have attended last week's class. I appreciate it, and thank you for sharing so deeply. And let's close our eyes. Let's really deeply tune into the masters, particularly Swami Kriyananda and Yogananda. And let's open our hearts, our minds, feel them with us dynamically now, that they're sitting with us. I'll explore this a little bit further, but just feel that Swami Kriyananda will be talking to us personally, individually, as well as to the group, sharing in satsang his experiences. And feel the masters are speaking to us, and let's pray to them. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, great masters of Kriya Yoga and self-realization, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Paramhansa Yogananda, and our friend and guide, Swami Kriyananda, saints and masters of all religions, all paths, we humbly bow at thy feet. Beloved Swami, beloved Master, we offer you our lives. We come to your feet now, open hearts, open minds. Bless this satsang. Help us to listen deeply, and through it, deepen our attunement to Thee, to God. Help us to deepen our spiritual lives, and most of all, deepen our devotion and increase our yearning to find God as quickly as possible. Om peace. Amen. Okay. So Let me just put some music on. And this is Blessed.
Blessed, blessed, the life that is given to God. Blessed, blessed, the ways where His feet have trod. All the joys that human heart can know, may His love on you bestow. May all dangers from your path be moved, all delusion by His truth is proved. Blessed, blessed, the life that is given to God. Blessed, blessed, the heart open to His love. Blessed, blessed, the light that shines from above. All the wealth for which men never schemed, all the beauty ever dreamed, all the gains for which men sigh and mourn will be harvested in God alone. Blessed, blessed, the light open to His love.
And now, as we just meditate for a few moments, as there's no space or time, let us bring our consciousness to the Crystal Hermitage Dome at Dananda village. Feel that we are there back in the 1970s, that Swami Kriyananda is in that dome, which is his living room, and that we are part of the community that's gathering in satsang. We're not in front of our computers, in our homes. We are in that vibrant, powerful, potent, joyful energy of friendship. And feel just tuning in to Swami Kriyananda as the stories and his attunement to the masters come through us. So let's just focus here for 1 minute before we begin reading. Opened hearts.
I waited until I'd reached my room in Scarsdale before opening the book, and then began the most thrilling literary adventure of my life. Autobiography of a Yogi is the story of a young Bengali Indian's intense search for God. It describes a number of living saints he met on his journey, especially his own great guru, Swami Kriyananda. It also describes more clearly than any other mystical work I have ever read since the author's experiences with God, including the highest one possible, samadhi, mystical union. In chapter after chapter, I found moving testimony to God's living reality, not only in infinity, but in the hearts and lives of living human beings. I read of how Yogananda's prayers, even for little things, had been answered, and of how, by placing himself unreservedly in God's hands, his unanticipated needs had been met unfailingly. I read of intense love for God, such as I myself yearned to possess, of a relationship with him more intimate, more dear than I had dared to imagine possible. Until now, I had supposed that a life of meditation might give me, at best, a little peace of mind. But here I discovered all at once that the fruit of the spiritual life is a love and bliss, quote, beyond imagination of expectancy, end quote. Until recently I had doubted the value of prayer, except perhaps as a means of uplifting oneself. But now I learned and could not for a moment doubt that God relates individually, lovingly, to each and every seeker. Miracles abound in this book. Many of them, I confess, were quite beyond my powers of acceptance at the time. Instead of dismissing them, however, as I would certainly have done had I read about them in almost any other book, I suspended my incredulity. For the spirit of this story was so deeply honest, so transparently innocent of pride or impure motive, that it was impossible for me to doubt that its author believed implicitly every word he wrote. Never before had I encountered a spirit so clearly truthful, so filled with goodness and joy. Every page seemed radiant with light. As I read Autobiography of a Yogi, I alternated between tears and laughter, tears of pure joy, laughter of even greater joy. For 3 days I scarcely ate or slept. When I walked, it was almost a tiptoe, as if in an ecstatic dream. What this book described, finally, was the highest of sciences, Kriya Yoga, a technique that enables the seeker to advance rapidly on the path of meditation. I, who wanted so desperately to learn how to meditate, felt all the excitement of one who has found a treasure map, the treasure in this case being a divine one, buried deep within my own being. Autobiography of a Yogi remains the greatest book I have ever read. One perusal of it was enough to change my whole life. From that time on, my break with the past was complete. I resolved in the smallest detail to follow Paramhansa Yogananda's teaching. Finding that he recommended a vegetarian diet, I immediately renounced meat, fish, and fowl. He could have recommended a diet of bread and water, and I'd have adopted that diet without a qualm. For more than anything else, what this book gave me was the conviction that in Yogananda I had found my guru, my spiritual teacher for all time to come. Only a few days earlier, I hadn't even known this strange word, guru. I hadn't known anything about yoga or reincarnation or karma, or almost any of the basic precepts and terminology of Indian philosophy. Now, incredibly, I felt such deep and utter trust in another human being that, ignorant of his philosophy though I was, I was willing to follow him to the end of life. And while I had yet to meet him, I felt as I had on seeing his face on the cover of the book, that he was the truest friend I had ever known. The day after becoming a vegetarian, I was invited by friends of my family, Mr. and Mrs. Lloyd Gibson, to lunch at their home. To my combined amusement and dismay, the main dish consisted of chicken a la king. Not wanting to hurt my friends' feelings, I compromised by pushing the chicken bits to one side and eating the vegetables in their chicken sauce. George Calvert, on whose father's farm Bob and I had worked after my graduation from high school, had invited me the following day to lunch at his parents' home and to a polo game afterwards. This time I had no choice but to refuse the thick, juicy hamburger sandwich that his mother offered me. To make matters still more awkward, George had considerately provided me with a date. I must have seemed strange company indeed, eating hardly anything and paying as little attention to the girl as politely possible from the opposite end of the room. Yogananda was a monk, I too would be a monk. The polo game gave me an opportunity for a little surreptitious meditation, so I didn't view the game as a total loss. Later that day I met my brother Bob and Dean Bassett, a friend of ours, at Nielsen's, an ice cream parlor in Scarsdale Village. Dean had been voted the biggest wolf in my senior high school class. He and Bob were discussing Dean's favorite subject, girls. I listened in silence for a time. At last I protested, "Don't you see? Desire only enslaves one to the very things he desires." Bob and Dean gazed at each other quizzically. "What's wrong with him?" Dean asked. It was years before I realized that comprehension, like a flower, must unfold at its own pace. Until a person is ready to embrace a truth, even the clearest logic will not make it acceptable to him. As soon as I finished reading Autobiography of a Yogi, my impulse was to jump onto the next California-bound bus. But I didn't want to be impulsive, so I waited a whole day. I even debated for several hours whether it might not be wiser for me to go to sea, as I'd first planned, and there meditate a few months before making such an important decision. But, of course, I knew already that it was the right decision. The following day I packed my bag and took an early train into New York City. My godfather, Dr. Winthrop Haynes, had been sympathetically concerned for my future. He and his wife were like second parents to me. I didn't feel I could leave New York without bidding him farewell. On my way to the bus station, therefore, I stopped by his office at Rockefeller Center. Finding him out of his office, I left a note on his desk with the message, "I'm going to California to join a group of people who I believe can teach me what I want to know about God and about religion." This was the first intimation I had given anyone that God was my true goal in life. I took the next available westbound bus. Thereafter, for 4 days and 4 nights, my home was a succession of long-distance buses. My break with the past was so sudden, so complete, that I sometimes ask myself whether some very special grace had not been needed to make it possible. I wonder what I would have done, for example, if Mother had still been in America. Would I have had the courage to take such a drastic step? Who knows? She would almost surely have opposed my directions, unprecedented as they were. After all, what did I know of the Indian teachings? Nothing. And here I was planning to devote my entire life to them. Had Mother been there, would she have succeeded in deflecting me from my purpose? The question has become academic. But even so, wasn't it remarkable that it was the very day I put Mother on her ship to Cairo, that I discovered the book that was to change my life. Strange indeed are God's ways. I was to see much of them in the years that followed. Never have they ceased to make me marvel.
Okay. So I'm hoping the sound's coming through. Thank you, Vikram, for commenting about the mic. I could bring it up here a little bit. But hopefully it's coming through a little bit better now. What a wonderful, we're diving in very slowly with this book. We're trying to take moments that we may meditate on. We're going to maybe in the week re-listen to this on Audible or whatever form you have, or actually read the chapter again and really dive into it. And just a point that really came up to me while I was reading this and as I've been reflecting upon it over the week is just that each time you reread one of these deep books, whether it's Autobiography of a Yogi, whether it is this book, The New Path, or others, because as we're on the spiritual path, we reread and we reread these books over time. And it's always important to reflect how differently we see things as we go into the rereading of that book. Points come to us that were never there before, that we didn't see or tune into, or we start to realize that we have a different understanding or appreciation of that one teaching that we read and did take in consciously, but it's changed as we have grown as disciples, as spiritual seekers. I was just speaking to a friend of mine over the weekend because here we are in 2021 at the, we have the inauguration. It's a very divisive time. The country is divided. And I really feel it's a wonderful time to dive into the new path because this is a time to deepen our attunement. It's a time to really look at ways in which we can deepen our discipleship and understand the path more deeply. We have to take time to do that. And we were discussing, just because on Facebook, even within the Ananda world, there were some posts, people that were disagreeing with the way Ananda was doing things. They couldn't quite understand, Swami Kriyananda having such a big presence at Ananda, that it should be more focused on Yogananda. And, that's what came to mind as I had been thinking about this, was just how attuned Swami Kriyananda was to Yogananda. This book shows you how deeply attuned he is and was to Yogananda immediately, kind of straight away. He got that level of understanding, even though there were many things that he was green on the path, and of course that took a while to grow into, but at the same time that it really took, that he really understood Yogananda, and that he really lived his life to be in tune with him, to think like him, to speak like him, to feel that everything that he did was what Yogananda wanted. It wasn't the only ray or mission or expression of Master, but it was his unique ray that Swami was to bring through, and it was a very expansive ray. And so studying the new path is a wonderful way to tune into both Swami Kriyananda and Yogananda. And I know I've kind of mentioned this before, but I really wanted to bring that back. And my friend was saying that, they had noticed that they've been on the path many years, 40 to 50, I don't know how many, 30, I don't know. We didn't mention a number, but they've been on a path, decades, 2, 3, I'm not entirely sure, but a fair while. And they were saying that, just when what's laid out, what Master is asking of us, what Swami is asking of us, what leadership is asking of us, sometimes in the beginning we think we don't need to do this or that. And she was saying that basically this was, now, those many years later, looking back, how true it was and how wise those words were. And if only I'd followed that advice then. But, part of the path is coming to that understanding. And Yogananda mentions a little bit later in the chapter here, I'll jump to it, but Swami Kriyananda mentioned it was years before I realized that comprehension, like a flower, must unfold at its own pace until a person is ready to embrace the truth. Even the clearest logic will not make it acceptable to him. And of course, he means to her as well when he says that. So just it really highlighted that for me. And also looking back in my own life, the number of mistakes I've made, the things that I thought, oh, well, maybe I should do it this way or that way. And I've just been on this particular path, really since 2009. So 11 years, not too long, really, more than some people, but not as long as others. And I can easily look back and just think, gosh, or have an understanding and just realize the wisdom of something. And so coming back to the new path is a wonderful way for us to dive in. And so I just wanted to mention that, those couple of points, which are kind of not necessarily part of the book, but they are as well, because we are in such interesting times. Anyway, what came out of this chapter for me, as we kind of, we finish up this chapter, A Map to God, definitely was what Swami Kriyananda, the young Donald Walters, got from reading Autobiography of a Yogi. And so he got these points that came through. Yogananda's prayers, even for little things, had been answered. And this speaks to my heart. One of the things that really stands out for me also with Autobiography of a Yogi is that when you look very intensely at this book, you look at it a little bit more closely, that those prayers are answered. Even when Yogananda prays about his friends, his family members, all of these things, and also how he not only prays about them, but also asks his guru for intercession, to help him out. And so it's it very much stands out for me, just as a guide and a reminder to all of us that we can pray to the guru, we can pray to God in all matters and get those prayers answered the more intensely that we pray. And of course, allowing that it's in the divine will and abiding by his laws. Sometimes we don't get prayers answered, and there's a teaching in there for us. But always I noticed that when even all sorts of different areas, Yukteswar, Sri Yukteswar, his guru, would help him out in the end. By placing himself unreservedly in God's hands, his unanticipated needs had been met unfailingly. So Yogananda had given his life to God, and many examples of this. Two Penniless Boys in Brindaban is a wonderful chapter that really highlights this, but it's mentioned throughout the entire book. And then the other part, which I think touches all of us, although it didn't me in the beginning when I first read Autobiography of a Yogi, but as I've reread and as I've deepened on the path myself, I read Autobiography of a Yogi in my early 20s and was on a spiritual path that was exploring lots of different spiritual paths. And it was, I think, the first or the second book I read. And I didn't get this particular thing from it, but I got so much that I did connect with. But this was what it read. I read of, this is what Swami's saying of it. I read of intense love for God, such as myself yearned to possess, of a relationship with him more intimate, more dear than I had dared to imagine possible. Just wonderful. And we're going to meditate a little bit on these thoughts in a moment. And the fruit of the spiritual life, Swami continues, is a love and bliss beyond imagination of expectancy. Of course, those last few words, beyond imagination of expectancy, comes from the poem Samadhi that is in the book Autobiography of a Yogi that Yogananda wrote on a subway in New York, of all places. I was always surprised when I heard that, but just wonderful. And so for me, I have to say, one of the things that really I use practically from Autobiography of a Yogi, not the book, not that I have to go back to Autobiography of a Yogi and read these sections, although I do at times. One of the things that really stands out to me is the amazing stories of meditation of both Yoganandas or the young Mukundas, individual meditation practices that he did in graveyards, in caves, going off to meet these saints and teachers and these profound experiences, or whether they're with his friends or with these teachers, just what comes to mind for me in my own daily Kriya practice, not that I think of this daily, but it does help me at times, is just the ability that he could dive deep in meditation. Now, one can, of course, say that he is an avatar. He was a bright light brought to bring a mission here. But part of that mission and part of what Yogananda is sharing is that we too can be that. In fact, later in this book, one of the lines that really stands out to me is when Swami shares about a disciple lamenting to Paramhansa Yogananda, "But you're a master." Of course, kind of exclaiming, "Of course you can do it. You're a master." And Yogananda, with that seriousness and depth, kind of just looked at him and pierced his heart with these words, "And what do you think made me a master?" I'm paraphrasing there, but just that really Autobiography and the New Path is showing us, it's speaking to you and I in everyday life. And so the magic and the majesty of the meditations and Kriya, even if we think ourselves not very good meditators, not very long meditators, wherever our meditation is at the moment, because right now, of course, we are in a very challenging time and meditation might be going through a hard time for people, but we can tune into, we are the masters, we are children of the divine. And so I've always been able to draw that out of Autobiography, and I encourage you to really think that way, that we are Yoganandas, we are Swami Kriyanandas. I'll share in a couple of chapters' time, when Swami Kriyananda first goes to Mount Washington, how he would rise at 4 a.m. to meditate. And I remember first moving to Ananda village, and I started to tune into that and started to get up at 4 a.m. and go off into the expanding light temple. I'd energize there, maybe do some yoga postures, and then I'd go down to the village temple, which was Hansa at the time, and meditate. I didn't do it every day, but it certainly was a habit of mine in those early days that I really got into. So why don't we, and then let's just see also, Master also said, just that he could not doubt, Swami could not doubt for a moment that God relates individually, lovingly to each and every seeker. And let's just take a moment, closing the eyes and just really tuning into what Autobiography of a Yogi holds for each of us, whether you read it later on the path or it was your first book. and also the new path, what the promises, what the messages were that you brought out of those books, really tuning into them now. And as you think on that, meditate on that, I'm just going to remind us. So Yogananda, keeping that meditative depth. Meditate on that prayers, even for little things, can be answered by God, by Guru. Look in your own life today. What do you need to pray about? The little things that seem inconsequential, as well as the big things. Just make a mental note. What can I pray about? How can I place God unreservedly, my life unreservedly into the hands of God? What in my life today am I worried about? Am I fearful about? What do I need to develop spiritually that I think I can't do? How can I give that to God? Just meditate for a few moments. Maybe it's finances, maybe it's a relationship challenge, maybe it's a move, maybe you're struggling with meditation. And how is your love for God? Just meditate on this. When we come to the path, when we're first reading Autobiography or the new path, we're connecting and opening up, so filled with enthusiasm. Where are we at today with everything going on in the world and the challenges? Is my love for God intense? Talk to God now, offering help, asking for help to increase that intense yearning. Have I been coasting? Have I been walking backwards? Have I been running backwards? Have I taken a detour, a rest stop? Or am I going towards God? Not outwardly, but inwardly with the heart. Just meditate on that for a moment. Beloved Swamiji, Master, help us to develop a deeper and deeper yearning and intensity for God. That each day is deeper than the previous. Peace, Amen. And finally, just meditating for a few moments on the fruit of the spiritual life. And for us, in our lives right now, we're not at the end of our spiritual life, but we've been on it for some time. If you've been just come across this recording or live broadcast and you're new to it, just reflect on what you hope for the spiritual path. But for all others that have been on it some time, just tune into the goal is beyond imagination of expectancy. Love and bliss beyond imagination of expectancy. And just meditate without even posing a question. on those words. And let's come out of meditation there. And these are important things to reflect upon, because we want to continually be digging and diving deeper on the path, even when we're going through intense testing, or even if we've gone through intense testing. I've gone through a period of intense testing, and I find it very strengthening in the end, but it was incredibly challenging at the time. I took a detour, and it was a very challenging time for me. But tests can be incredibly strengthening for us. And so it's important to, tune into what the goal is and deepening. The reason I wanted to mention tests is because also it was very opening for me, a depth of feeling and intensity for God has come through that testing, because I realized that I remember Naya Swami Jaya saying this, and I think others have said this for sure, but at a Kriya initiation once at the village, he was saying that we should have a feeling of that the spiritual path is a matter of life and death. And I think for myself, when I heard that at that particular time, I knew I didn't have that intensity. And testing was one of the ways that really woke me up to the importance of that, having that outlook that our spiritual life, it means everything to us. Life and death sounds very daunting, but how do we develop that if we don't have it? And it's by developing deep devotion and always looking to dive deeper. As we have just the last few minutes, just to say the other things that really stood out for me from that particular chapter was just the mini tests that that the young John J. Donald Waters, Donald, was going through. His friends coming, offering him hamburgers and meat and talking about girls and all the different things. And he had, chosen this path, and he had very intensely chosen and felt that Yogananda was his guru. And the other thing to just mention as well, and we all get tested. We all get tested by family, friends, colleagues, life, Maya, the world, desires. We all get tested, and that doesn't stop just once we get to Mount Washington or Ananda communities or wherever we are. That continues on throughout our lives. But we get to choose in the moment that this is our life. The other thing I just wanted to bring up as well, I think we've only got a couple minutes. It's such a short time. What was it now? Maybe I don't need to bring it up. No, it doesn't come, but just that overwhelming kind of picture from this chapter of finding the guru, finding that this was the path, and stopping at nothing, and just choosing to become a monk, choosing to become a vegetarian, and the grace that came from his mother going off to Egypt and not being in the country, and to make this incredibly drastic change. I think it's well worth us reflecting on what we've had to do on our path. And as I was saying, I was having this healthy conversation with this friend of mine over the weekend, and just what also struck me at this point is how much we have to give up to come to an Ananda community, to move to the village, to move to Ananda Sacramento or Palo Alto. It takes a great deal, and that we really are dedicating our lives often we look at our lives through our own lens of delusional, often delusional, tinted glasses, and we think that we aren't all these different things, but actually we too in our own way are giving up a great deal to be here and to do our best to live a life for God, and it is a blessed life. Wonderful to be with you again. Thank you for bearing with me as I find my feet in these first few classes on how to share everything, technologically speaking, as well as in actuality, the actual content of the classes. Take this week to reflect on this chapter again if you wish to, read ahead. We are going into a wonderful chapter because this is where Master Swami Kriyananda meets Yogananda. And one of the things, I don't know, I think next week we will, I think it's about 15 minutes, the whole chapter. I think we'll listen to it all, but we're actually going to tune into Swami Kriyananda, I keep saying this, Donald Walters, I think you know who I mean, taking discipleship from Yogananda. So it might be a wonderful week. We've just had the celebration of Yogananda's birthday where we recommitted our vows of discipleship. So maybe take time to go over that vow again, dive into the handbook on discipleship, tune into what discipleship is for you, because we're going to have an experiential meditation where we tune into that aspect next week and really feel in that moment the power of Yogananda's hands vibrating, an arm vibrating for 2 minutes as he opens Swami into the ray of discipleship. Many blessings, great souls. It's wonderful to be with you. Thank you. Have a blessed week.